Morning, everybody. Thank you, Susan, for that amazing devotional. I really appreciate you and the support you and Kim have given me, because it hasn't really been an easy journey. And to be here, it's such an honor. I've never done this before. I'm very people shy. I say that, but when I'm talking, I keep talking. Yeah. Yeah. So I'll give a brief history as to where I came from. Actually, my first name, I'm Beverly Grace, and I was born in a country in Southern Africa. It's called Zambia. We are formerly a British colony. So at the time I was born, I think they had the country had acquired some of the British practices where a child had to have an English name for them to have a birth certificate. So I was named Beverly Grace, and I was born to two loving parents. They're still together, my mom and dad. And I do have four sisters and one brother. My sister passed away a few years ago. And I was raised in a good home, a loving home, very religious, raised Seventh-day Adventist. So couldn't wear earrings, no makeup, dresses, Sometimes we had to cover our hair. That way, there was always something going on. Couldn't eat meat. And the Sabbath was a big deal growing up in our home. So when it's Friday evening, no cooking, no cleaning. So everything had to be prepared. And we used to read the Bible almost every day growing up. So I learned how to speak English fluently compared to all the other kids around us. Because even our babysitter who used to live with us learned how to speak English just from reading the Bible with my mom and dad. So we've always stayed close. Over the years, I've always been in touch with my family, and I'm very close to my dad. So all these years, it's like he's always been there. My mom too, but my dad always takes a special spot in my heart. And I went to college and I did an associate's degree in insurance studies. I was hoping to be an underwriter. And I met a lovely, handsome man, and I couldn't graduate. I dropped out because I got pregnant with my oldest son. So that was in 94. I had to just drop out because I just couldn't go to school anymore. So I had my oldest son in 1995, and I met Kennedy, who is the father of my three boys. And we decided to play house. I was 21, he was 23, and we got a small cottage in our neighborhood where we used to live. It's called Woodlands. So we raised our son, and we were just kids, but my dad would always come. So he would buy groceries for us. He would make sure our light bill is paid. So eventually, we're able to get on our feet. I went back to school, but I still couldn't graduate because I got pregnant again with my second son. So everything kind of crumbled. So I had to stay home and raise the two boys. And we used to live in Woodlands where I grew up. So eventually Kennedy decided to come to America. Actually, he got a student's visa, and he was being sponsored in a way to come to the US to study. So he came to the United States in the year 2000, and I stayed back with my two boys, and he did really well. The first years were really hard for him because he was in Atlanta, Georgia. And, he would send money, but it was just so hard not working, raising two young kids. So I went to live with his brother because they had a family home in another neighborhood. So it was a big house, and I would get support, from his older brother, who was really amazing. So I lived there with them, and I eventually got a job in the insurance industry, and I was thriving. I was so happy. And then he was here. He wanted me to come here. So he did all the paperwork, and eventually I came here in 2004. And at that time, he had moved from Georgia to Phoenix, Arizona. So I came, and we lived in Phoenix, Arizona, and I left my two boys in Zambia because, he was here and he's like, you be here just a little while and then we'll get the kids. So I came here, and Kuzi, who everybody knows, was born in Phoenix, Arizona. We used to live in Scottsdale because by that time Kennedy was working for Frank Lloyd Wright Toyota. He always worked for Toyota dealerships because he was an auto engineer. So he was always fixing cars. He was always analyzing technology. He was very successful, and he was such a good father. But when I came to the US, I started to notice some things not right, So there was our relationship started to decline. So I remember there were times when he wouldn't come home, and I'll be home with little Kuzi, and I'm calling and he's not answering. So eventually, a few years later, he told me, he's like, it's not really working out. And I've met somebody else and I think I'm going to leave. But at that time, Kuzi was really small. So he told me, he's like, you know what? I don't want to leave you with a young child. I'll still come watch Kuzi while you're at work, but I think I'm done. So at that time, we had an apartment. So he kind of moved. He had his own room, which was always locked. So if I'm home, I couldn't get into his room. He would just come. And at first, I was trying so hard to make it work. I was begging, I was crying, but it's just like he doesn't want to be here. And I kind of got to know the other woman, and they were already making plans to move on together. So I was like, okay, that's fine. And I had support from my job, and my friends were like, there's nothing you can do. He doesn't want you. So he stopped buying food, he stopped paying rent. So there was a way I started taking care of myself, because he just did not want to be there. It was just there to pick up Kuzi and then be done. So in 2009, I remember it was in February, I went to work. We used to have lockers because it was a healthcare industry. He had called me so many times, I didn't see he had called. So I got home and he was just on the couch, like, can't breathe. So I'm like, what's wrong with you? He's like, take me to the hospital. I was like, what's wrong? I'm like, what did you do last night? So I'm like, I'm not interested. I just wanted him to leave because we were just arguing and fighting. He's like, please listen to me, take me to the hospital. So I took him to the hospital. At that time, we used to live in a suburb called Awatuki. I took him to Chandler Regional Hospital. They took him into the ICU right away, and they told me that he was very sick. I was like, how can he be sick? I mean, he's fine. And they had to run some tests. It was just like so chaotic. They had to run some tests. They actually showed me the x-ray of his chest. It was just like snow. So I was really hopeful. I was like, he'll be fine. Things just went from up here to. There was also a time I remember where he was due for a biopsy, and he just had a cardiac arrest. When they called me, I was already on my way to the hospital. By the time I got to the hospital to sign authorization, he was like dead. He was just laying on the table. And I just signed whatever they gave me. So they put him, I can't even remember right now because I get emotional. And it had to rotate him. It was a good hospital. They did that for 24 hours. And it kind of revived him, but he had to be on life support. So he was on life support for several weeks. And eventually they took him off life support, and they told me that I should put him on hospice. I was like, I don't want to put him on hospice. He has another woman. He has another life. Why should I be part of this? So we never even did that because he went back to the ICU, and Kennedy died on April 10th of 2009. And it was just the most unreal thing. And that's why it's just this part of my story that I'm going to share. because there was this presence, I was just hopeless. This is not the plan. The plan was for him to marry Amy and bring my kids from Africa and we can move on, not for me to have to start planning a funeral. So eventually he passed away, and that hospital just really helped me because I had no clue. So I was referred to a mortuary where they were able to pick him up, and they took a while. So I stayed with him because I was there when he passed away. And prior to him dying too, he was refusing care, and he would yell at the nurses that they're trying to kill him. And each time there was a procedure that could be done to help him, he would refuse. And all he wanted, he's like, let me go, let me go. He had tubes sticking out. He had been on life support. So I think it was too much. I was fighting, what do we do to save his life? But eventually I was like, you know what? Let him go. Actually, one of the doctors actually told me, he's like, you're giving up. I was like, he doesn't want to live. So they had actually given him 24 hours to live after they took him off life support, but he only lived for 8 hours and he passed away. It was about 1 o'clock. That was April 10th of 2009. And then here I was, I had a 4-year-old and a job and 2 children in Africa. I'm like, what the heck? What am I going to do? But lucky enough, he was a very friendly guy. He was very well known in the social settings, and people came from all over. And it took us almost a month. At first, his family wanted us to send his body home, but it was like $24,000. Wow. Because we had to buy a special casket for it to get on a plane. And it was just too much. But we had already raised enough money for us to buy a burial plot. And it was like hundreds of people. I was like, who are these people? His managers from Toyota came, and he's buried in Sun Lake City in Arizona. And that was in 2009. And my whole world just crumbled. So I had Kuzi. He was 4 when his father died, and I had my 2 kids who are still in Africa up to this day. So my journey began. I was already, in a way, prepared to be alone because he was going to leave. So I still had an apartment, but I had no one to watch my son while I worked because his father used to do that. So some friends came, they had a house, and they're like, can you come and live with us while you get on your feet? And it was really fine. So I went right within Ahwatukee, which is near South Mountain, the reservation in Phoenix. I lived with them for a year. And then by then I had raised enough money for Kuzi to go to daycare. So I found an apartment. I lived by myself, but boy, oh boy. Kennedy had done so many things that after he passed away, the stories that I started to hear just broke me. I had so much resentment towards him and anger because I came to the US in 2004. I was barely getting on my feet. And not only was he going to leave me, he dies, leaves me with 3 kids. How does that happen? So I had started building resentment. They asked me, the cemetery were like, you need to put a tombstone. I was like, do I really want to do this? So I started to pay for it, and it became a drain on my money. I was like, I'm not doing this. I'll just walk away from this. And there was gossip within the Zambian community because I don't know what he was doing. I know, but I was like, I have to get out of this. I can't continue. I made bad decisions. I started dating, and I was like, I need to get out. It felt like a big force just pushing me, get out. Like I came to a point where I just had no choice but to leave. And how I ended up here in California was that I have a cousin, she lives in Orange County. She's like, just come, you'll be fine here. We'll look after each other. And I'd worked for this company for like 7 years. So I was like, I'm just going to transfer with the same company. But they didn't have an office in Santa Margarita where she lives. I could only be here in Solana Beach. So I was like, okay, at least I'll have a job. I had Kuzi with me. So everything I had to do was, I'm the only parent. I have this little boy with me. And people would tease me. They would say, Grace never goes without that little boy because I had nowhere to leave him. So everywhere I went, if it's a birthday party, whatever, a meeting at work, I'll just drag him with me. But I'd worked for this company so long that they were so understanding and they were so eager to transfer me. And I came to work in Solana Beach, but I lived in San Marcos. So I was dating this guy. He was just so loving and he helped move. He drove the truck. We found a place in San Marcos. And I couldn't keep the job in Solana Beach because I couldn't be home to pick up Kuzi because he used to go to Nob Hill Elementary. And how do I do that when I work in Solana Beach? So I had to give up my job and the struggle began and I struggled here and there. And at one point I met Jehovah's Witnesses and I had started studying because I was confused. I was angry at Kennedy. I was like, I need to find a way to get back to God. And I started studying with Jehovah's Witness, and the good things with Jehovah's Witness, they come to the house, they can stay and watch. So it was like, oh, this kind of works now. I'm making friends. I even get babysitters, and it worked for a little while, but I just couldn't. Their teachings were a little hard for me, and then I just couldn't do it anymore. There was a church across the street. It was North County Baptist Church. It's right on Nodo and Centrocado in San Marcos. So I used to go there and he was getting bigger. So he was able to cross the street by himself. That way he can go to church and I'm at work and he's at the cross light and I would call him. He learned how to use the computer and the phone when he was very young. Because actually, even when he went to kindergarten, when he was 4 years old, the teachers told me that he could write my name. He could write his name, he would write my name. He drew a painting one time, put glasses, and he brought my mom's boyfriend. It was so embarrassing. So embarrassing. He was only 4 or 5. So he learned all these things because that's all he had. When I'm at work, he has a phone and the computer. So he would cross the street, go to North County Baptist Church, and there was Pastor Miller, a good preacher, and they just embraced us. And I had to move because I couldn't afford living there. They upgraded the apartment, so I had to move. So I was like, what do I do? So that's when I met my current husband, Dalton. And at that time, I was so desperate for any help. So he said, I'll help you move. He had a truck, helped me put stuff in storage. And that's another story for another day. But that's how I ended up being in San Diego. And eventually, because of my relationship with Dalton, I met Marty, and she had a party at one time. And Dalton baked a cake for Marty, and that's how, and that's how we met Steve and Lisa first. And they're like, yeah, Zambia? We've been to Zambia. So I kind of got, encouraged, and I was still going to Jehovah's Witness, not really knowing like where I belong. So we came to Grace Vineyard and we haven't stopped since. And
Wasn't
I think eventually we met him because we went to one of the fundraisers. But it was a little hard for me because I came from religion and rules and this. But here I come to Grace Vineyard, people are wearing pants in church. It was very strange for me because I'd gone to Jehovah's Witness churches where you have to wear a dress, you have to behave in a certain way. So I still had to adjust. But even then, I was still ready to run. I was like, I can't do it. So that's how I came to Grace Vineyard, and that's how my journey to know who Jesus is began. Because I always look at some events like it's a path leading to a point. The pandemic hit just about the time I started coming to Grace Vineyard, and we had church on Zoom, and we had different study groups. So I started to know people. I started to learn things that I just didn't accept. To me, it was like, how does that work? What's this Holy Spirit you're talking about? And even the connection of my relationship with God, it was not there. I grew up in a Christian home, reading at the stories of I just used to go around in circles, and I was angry at Kennedy. I felt betrayed. I felt stupid. Like, how could you mess up like that? You know, and my kids were growing up in another continent, and I still supported my two boys, but it was just so hard. And when I came to Oceanside and started going to Grace Vineyard, I just doors started to open to my understanding of who God is. I started to study books. There's one study we did with Kim. Now I can't even remember. I think it was a Jenny Allen book was my first one that we did. And I would read it at work on the bus because I ride the bus. I don't drive. I had to save money over the years, and it's just something I had to give up. So I started to read on my own and to learn who God is. And my journey started to make a pattern. Like there's a purpose in everything that happened to me. Leaving my homeland where I was comfortable with my dad, my grandmother, my father, my mom, everybody was there. And I come to this land and this man abandons me. And here I am in San Diego by myself. And if by that time, Kuzi was like 10. For some reason, I started to see that there's something going on here. So all that noise of religion and the influence of friends and partying, because I had started to do that, I couldn't hear that anymore. It wasn't important to me. I was raised Seventh-day Adventist. I never went back to a Seventh-day Adventist church. And I started to look at the way I was raised and the things which were taught to be true. I'm like, there's something not right about this teaching here, because I just couldn't add it all up. Because I'm learning something new at the same time holding on to the ideologies of religion. And I'm having a relationship with Jesus, and I felt like they are just two different things. So that's how I ended up being here in Oceanside. And I had to learn to forgive Kennedy. I was mad at him. And as I've taken this journey to know who Jesus is and to learn and understand who Yahweh is, and I'm his creation, he made me to be who I am, and he only wants good things for me. I have forgiven that man for what he did, and I hope he's forgiven me too. And I had to write this last part. That way I don't mess up, you know. I wrote that my life has changed and I have come to know Jesus and have a personal relationship with him. He has transformed me and took me out of darkness, a lot of ignorance in me. Things I thought to be true were just lies. And he has showed me the light which comes through the knowledge of God. I have learned to love God and I've learned to obey me. He has replaced my hate for love, my unforgiveness for forgiveness, and my pride and selfishness for humility. He took me out of the influence of noise and ideologies of religion and culture, and now it's just me and him. He has showed me who he is and who I am. I left Zambia for a good job, nice clothes, and a better life, but all that just became ashes. It all just it means nothing. It's all vanity. But I found the greatest treasure of all, and I found him. Knowing God and learning his love and doing his will and living life day by day is a prized possession. My eyes are open to see that he is all I need. He loves me. He is merciful, patient, loving, forgiving, and he wants me to succeed at life. He desires for me to be more like him and be the image God created us to be. I surrender my life, my mind, and my heart to him every day. And that is why I found this verse, and it's Proverbs 19, verse 21. It says, many are the plans in a person's heart, but it's the Lord's purpose that prevails. I also like Matthew 11, verse 28, where Jesus was talking to a congregation, to his people, and he says, come to me, all who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your soul. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light. God is still writing my story, and I'm really excited to see the masterpiece, how the end of me will be. So that is my story.